thank you to ACT for having us and hosting this, and to our panelists and our funders, Agog Immersive Media Institute, MacArthur Foundation, Ford Foundation, and our partner, Coverlay. My name is Sarah Wallison. I am the director of the MIT Open Documentary Lab, and we're a research group that studies and incubates new forms of documentary storytelling and co-creative processes. In fact, we have a whole studio devoted to co-creation. And we look at the creative potential of emerging technologies, and we could critique them through documentaries that we make and the articles and reports we publish. We're also very outward-facing to the industry and do a lot of field building. The lab was founded by William Uricchio. He's a professor emeritus in comparative media studies writing and a renowned media historian and scholar. And I'm, in fact, going to read a statement that he wrote about layers of place. And it's called Palimpsest of Place. The geological striations that mark the Grand Canyon, like the accreted tangle of streets, buildings, and signage in downtown Manhattan, attest to a complex temporality. The world, both natural and man-made, is a palimpsest, with the persistent past interpenetrating the seamless veneer of the present. Complex overlays of history challenge the taken-for-grantedness of the now. The layering of image and sound on particular location enables a dialogue between text and place, and herein lies the added value of augmentation for documentary. Augmentation resonates with the physical world, both packing a punch by connecting the represented, the text, to the real, the site, and layering a particular spot in the world with meaning. In this sense, augmented media differ profoundly from everyday screen cultures, which, although always local, are surprisingly ambivalent in their demands of the relationship between place and text. What happens when media and place combine, and particularly documentary media and the places documented? The media shift from monologic to dialogic. That is, they shift from platforms for representation and expression to sites of engagement, interrogation, and dialogue with the larger world. Enabled by site specificity, this transformation can be witnessed in the work of a new generation of artists, activists, and documentarians that has entered public space, armed with the possibilities of emerging technologies as well as long-established techniques for augmenting, documenting, confronting, and shifting cultural narratives. From large-scale projections that draw attention to the contradictions of the past, to mobile apps that augment familiar spaces with unfamiliar stories. These scenarios go beyond representation to transformation, changing our relationship with the surrounding world. Augmentation has a deep history, from trail markings to commemorative plaques to graffiti, that can inform our thinking about the latest augmentation technologies. And it is a history that offers far greater creative agency to individuals than institutionalized media forms, whether centralized like broadcasting or networked like algorithmically curated social media. These technologies will continue to transform, keeping pace with Moore's Law, but their transformation also brings it pressing questions. How can artists, storytellers, and cultural institutions co-create with their communities and foster dialogue about their public spaces, augmenting people's experiences, and in the process, making public spaces more sociable and equitable? How can we include more voices, making our public memorialization process reflective of diverse communities and more democratic? How can we use augmentation technologies to reveal cultures and behaviors that have been, are in the process of being erased? Layers of Place offers an entry point to dialogues with layers of time, and with them, myriad untold stories and a chorus of new voices. So a little bit about our initiative. We're creating these dialogues through the artwork, but also through the conversations and workshops that we've organized. We'll put a link at the end. We're offering skill building workshops to give people space to express themselves and to create their own dialogues and interventions with the space around them. Our Layers of Place initiative comes out of a multi-year discussion and interrogation in our AR and public space working group, and what it means to make documentaries in and of a place and with community. And when we say documentary, we don't mean a documentary film necessarily, but any kind of story experience that is based on the real. In the documentary field, people often reference the definition coined by John Grierson, the founder of the National Film Board of Canada, the creative treatment of actuality. Combining the notion of documentary with augmented reality, we explore augmentation, the digital overlay on the physical, and its aesthetic, civic, and political implications. How can it make you see a place anew, be a counter-narrative to dominant narratives, a memorial to a buried or unknown story, a plaque of inquiry and imagination where the past, present, and future meet? As we watch unprecedented assaults on our freedom of expression in the United States, it's interesting to think about what role augmented reality can play as resistance to censorship, as it's both invisible and visible. These are the kind of questions we're asking and the dialogues we want to engender with Layers of Place and tonight's conversation with our distinguished panelists. You all have their bios in the program, so we're not going to do long introductions, and so we can let the conversation begin. Without further ado, I pass it on to Leonie Bradbury, tonight's moderator. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I was just reminiscing earlier this week with Sarah about how I got involved in this project. So about 2 years ago, Rasheen Pahandesh, who's my colleague at Emerson College, invited me for a conversation with the MIT Open Documentary Lab, and we just started talking about the challenges, the opportunities, the impact of augmented reality and using that in a public art space. And I was also thinking about how I kind of got interested in that subject matter. And actually my first exposure to it really was here at MIT at a couple of different conferences that I attended, and then also through the exhibition, the auto show on the Greenway in 2020, which was supported by Hoverlay. And then actually Nicholas and I collaborated on running a pilot program for training artists how to use augmented reality and the Hoverlay platform through a workshop series where we got funding from the city of Boston, and last year we had a cohort of 10 artists who trained for 20 hours. And it was really amazing, and a number of them are currently producing projects as part of Transform Boston, a temporary monument project that's happening in Boston right now as well as last year. So there will be a whole bunch of contemporary art projects using AR in Boston in the next year. So that's a little bit about my background, and we have 5 different perspectives on the panel here. And we have 3 people who will be presenting, but I do think we should each go down the line and just briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll go into the presentations.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Nicholas Robb. I'm the co-founder of Hoverlay. So Hoverlay is actually a local company. A co-founder and I created Hoverlay in 2017. Initially to help performing musicians to augment their events and share content, just like an event like this. If I could, I thought was, what if I could just drop things here and you would pick them up virtually? It was this simple idea, and COVID hit, and as people going to concert and things, and we started to expand to other form of public art and other form of augmentation through the platform.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this presentation tonight. My name is Michael Dawson. My wife and I founded an organization called Innovators for Purpose 11 years ago, and as we looked around, we saw too many young people not being able to connect the dots between their interests and opportunities in the innovation economy. So we founded Innovators for Purpose to help them build their identity as innovators and build the skills, the mindsets, and the confidence to participate in this innovation economy. Now, we've actually been using Hoverlay since 2020, so we were one of the early users of this technology. I'm really excited to show you some of the work that our young people have done, but we use really storytelling to tell stories that they're really interested in spreading the word about, typically around social issues. We've worked on projects from educational inequalities to lack of representation in AI. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation tonight.
Hi, my name is Meghna Singh. I'm a visual artist and researcher from Cape Town, South Africa. My work essentially focuses on the decolonial expression, be it in my artwork or academic work. I do lots of art-based research. I've been creating public art interventions, and I'm specifically interested in activating certain sites, highlighting colonial and capitalist legacies. And the project I've co-created with Lasiba Mabitsela, who's a fashion designer and African textile researcher, and Simon Wood, is called the Founders Pillars. Some of you who came for the tour saw it. The Founders Pillars is an AR activation or AR memorial honoring the life of the 6 enslaved people who were owned and kept in the house of the founder of MIT, William Barter Rogers, and I'd see it as a form of decolonial expression as well.
Hi, I'm Lori Landay, and my project, which is called Moving Memory AR, is one of the projects in part of Layers of Place. And it, like most of my work, is interested in the intersection of where technology and people's practices intersect. And it's located in Alchemist, the sculpture, Plence's sculpture. And I have a long relationship with it. One of the things that I really loved to do the most when I was a fellow at the Open Doc Lab was to sit out there, have my lunch, and I started to watch people take selfies in front of it. And looking at how people did that, how they posed, made me want to activate that space and that experience in a way that encouraged people not just to pose and stand still, but to move. So my project, I went to did a session with dancers and a choreographer at the Nano Immersion Lab for motion capture. And we worked with 2 dancers to do motion capture of different movements, some of them dance, some of them more pedestrian and kinds of dances that people could perhaps mimic. And the idea was to create an experience that is joyful and playful and brings movement and activity to that installation, that space. My project at the Open Doc Lab when I was a fellow was about motion and emotion, and so this is part of that.
Thank you. I'm Gediminas Urbonis. I'm artist and also associate professor here at Art, Culture and Technology program at MIT. I have a joint practice with my partner Nomedo Urbonis, who is also here in the audience today, and our research is focusing on shifting notion of public space, how public space should not be taken for granted, how it is produced through interventions, how it is eventual and performative, and also how new social and new sociability could be produced by extending from human to modern human. And in that respect, the interventions, especially with the help of technologies that allow us to see and also to hear into the registers that are not accessible by the human sensibility, it play an important role. So I'm going to speak about the Swamp Observatory project, which would not be possible actually without collaboration with Hoverlake.
So I think we'll do our presentations. You wanted to go? Okay, great.
Okay, so as I mentioned, co-founder, CEO of Innovators for Purpose. We are a design and innovation studio here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'd like to start with this project. I wish I could see you all there, but how many people have actually seen this sculpture before? You raise your hand? Okay, great. A few people have. How many people actually knew that was designed by teenagers? Okay, Halsey, because he's been around, and Nicholas, because he knows this. But that was the first installation we did in Kendall Square, and we just started the design in 2017, and it was installed in 2019. It's a permanent installation here in Kendall Square. Even though the theme of that is making Kendall's history visible, for us we had an internal theme as well, and it was around belonging. When we first started our work at Innovators for Purpose, a lot of young people who live, literally two blocks from here, told us that they didn't feel like they belonged in Kendall Square. And now with this installation, they not only feel like they belong, they are innovators who are adding value here in Kendall. This has become an iconic symbol in Kendall. There's pictures of it everywhere. People love it to come to it for a photo op. But that was before we discovered Hovland. So this project we designed in 2020. We met Nicholas here at MIT in January of 2020 and had no idea that 6 months later we'd be creating our first project with it. So this was during COVID, and this was the Monday following Memorial Day of 2020. And that's when George Floyd was murdered. The young people came, we were actually working through Zoom at the time, and we always start off with conversations about what's going on in the news, what's you're concerned with, and everyone was just, petrified. They had no idea what was going on. They'd never seen protests like this, and they were just really confused and anxious. And so we had a long conversation. At the end of the conversation, we said, well, we can either continue to be afraid or we can do something. I'm not sure what we can do, but we can do something. So, well, yeah, let's do something. So right after that, the wheels started turning, and this installation was born. I have, it's 5 scenes across the Cambridge Public Library lawn, and I'd like to show you the scene 3 of it.
Corona may have dominated the news, but the injustices of the world continue.
He shouted, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." Cops were standing around, not stopping anything, just straight up killed him.
When I first heard about it, I felt sad and angry at the same time, because the officers didn't care about George Floyd's life. He was pleading for his life by saying, "I can't breathe." The difference in color can make.
George Floyd's story has been the story of black folks, because ever since 401 years ago, the reason we could never be who we wanted and dreamed of being is you kept your knee on our neck. No jumper! No peace! No jumper! No peace! No jumper! No peace! No jumper! No peace! We were smarter than the underfunded schools you put us in, but you had your knee on our neck. Am I the reform? Am I the reform? We could run corporations and not hustle in the street, but you had your knee on our neck. We don't need a leader. No jumper. No peace. No jumper. No peace. We had creative skills. We could do whatever anybody else could do, but we couldn't get your knee off our neck. Am I the reform? Am I the reform? Am I the reform? Back up, back up. Freedom, freedom. What happened to Floyd happens every day in this country, in education, in health services, and in every area of American life. It's time for us to stand up in George's name and say, get your knee off our necks. No jumper! No peace! No jumper! No peace!
So as you can see.
As you can see, this is a digital overlay. You can see in the background, that's the Cambridge Public Library's lawn. All of these graphics was designed, everything in this presentation was designed by our young people. These are all high school students. They felt very passionate about this issue. And all of this was designed using overlay. So this just gives you a little more perspective on what the installation looked like. This is the Cambridge Library's lawn here on the left. We had 8 kiosks spread across the Cambridge Library's lawn, and visitors could actually interact with the story. You notice that we had scene 1 in multiple places because there's multiple entries into this point, and we wanted everyone to start with the same type of experience. This is another installation that we did in 2023. It's called 2 Blocks. It's around addressing educational inequities in the Cambridge public school system. And you'll notice that with all of our installations, there's some type of physical element there that anchors the entire presentation. And then from a QR code, it actually launches the experience. So if you have more questions, we can talk about it, but that's what I prepared for you tonight. Thanks.
All right, Nicholas will go next.
All right, so I just want to share with you maybe a couple of things we run into as far as people using Havalé that are kind of interesting from our standpoint, things that we feel maybe take this medium somewhere else. So I just want to share a couple of examples that are recent. So one of them that I think is quite interesting is an artist who created a piece for Millennium Park in Chicago. In her piece, she does inflatable work, and she creates these almost alien creatures out of large inflatable structures. But she created an AR experience where it's kind of a mother with little children, beings, and the patterns of interaction change throughout the year. So you go, and it's in a specific part of Millennium Park, the beautiful garden, and it changes with the season. So every time you go, you get, if you go every different seasons, you get a different experience. So it's like these creatures are living in this garden, and it kind of creates this metaphor for something that's happening. It's not just this one-off experience, but something that will evolve with time and kind of lives in this kind of parallel universe. So I thought it's a very interesting thing there that could be explored and I have not seen before being done. Another completely different experience is we work a lot now with a team in Washington, D.C. That started about a year ago, a project to create a tour of D.C., a little bit like the Freedom Trail in Boston, but with augmented reality. It's called 51 Steps to Freedom. As part of that, one of the first experience that I worked with them about a year ago is to record the mayor of DC talking about BLM Plaza right in front of the White House. And she was talking about how it came up to be and the George Floyd events and what led to that. And guess what, 2-3 weeks ago, it got just taken off, the street and replaced with something else. And I think it kind of led us to think about, something that you mentioned, Gaming, as earlier is, what if this could still stay there? Her story, obviously the painting could still be there virtually. And does it really matter? And in fact, so the fact that I think there's stuff to see now, we need to potentially preserve and kind of get the stories right and make sure that even if people want to change the narrative, there's potentially a technology that could emerge to help preserve and tell these stories for kids and others, obviously. And the last one that is also very recent is, that I thought is also very profound, is a memorial in Rhode Island, in Providence, Rhode Island. It's a Holocaust memorial. And they've started to record survivors, and sometimes the children of the survivors if they passed. And we started last year to record people on the green screen. And their purpose is that they want to place these people at the memorial so that whenever schools go there, they can meet people who actually tell you the story in a very unproduced, very direct way, you know, and you feel like you met somebody who lived through that. Now, obviously, there's an urgency. I mean, we recorded, I think, 8 people, and 2 already passed between the time we recorded them last year and now, so, but we have their stories. But again, I think it's another interesting element of documenting stories and kind of engaging, you know, locally with stories. And all these people are local residents. That's the whole point. So anyway, I thought I would share these 3 stories. I think they could maybe solicit or create some interesting discussions as well.
Caraminas, do you want to present?
Yeah, I would love to. Okay, so Swamp Observatory. It is a multi-annual project that started in 2020, and I was really glad to hear 2020 sort of like as an important date for many of the augmented reality, virtual reality projects. I think partially was also because of pandemic. You know, we were all looking for how could we access the site being remotely. How can we get into kind of like a certain sensibility, even if physically we are not there, right? So the Swamp Observatory, of course, it was very much informed by our ongoing interest and research into the swamps, into this irritant subject. That, of course, it is informed by the tension between the swamps as biotopes and the modernity, right? As for the history of the modern swamps were drained, you know, and also of its irritant subject in the political rhetoric, right? Draining the swamp. But we are looking kind of like more deeper into what is driving kind of like the swamp as epigenetic landscape with this overlay of the cybernetic, cultural, social, and mythological knowledges, and also knowledges that are otherwise also seen or treated as not civilized or inhuman. So of course, as we know from the cultural history, swamps were vilified and demonized, but also were also source for the different kind of scientific inspiration, especially in the 60s, experimental cybernetics, as you know from the work of Stafford Beer and Gordon Past. So with all these ideas in 19, we were invited to propose a public site intervention in Gotland, which is the biggest island in the Baltic Sea. And in the site that was actually envisioned for the planning of the sustainable city with 20,000 inhabitants. And the regional planning, the region of Gotland, which is one of these regions in Sweden, and also Baltic Art Center and the Public Art Agency of Sweden were interested in the artistic perspective, how the artistic perspective could add and destabilize kind of like regular planning perspective, right? So what kind of like new, what could be this new dimension that it could bring to the planning, right? So before the actual kind of like planning takes place. So we're at the very early stage of the planning, but the site is former regimental area. And we started to look also what's been envisioned on the site, including the water pond system for the runaway water, and all the community gardens, and all this new kind of like ecosystem that could kind of like be part of that, and what kind of like ecologies could be envisioned before the actual site is being developed. So we're looking from the proposal to climatic commons to kind of like methodology that is informed by the phenomenon. In this case, the swamp. So we're envisioning the future of the swamp, but also we're looking into the past history of the swamp's drain on Gotland Island, and also engagement with the local school, with the pupils of the local school, and also working with them in the peer review situation where artist studio and the pupils are exchanging, and then the process of translation that leads eventually to the intervention on the site. So we imagine this is like very kind of like start of our proposition, kind of like for the regional planning, right? So we imagine these choreographies taking place in this in the pond area or the future of the swamp, and these choreographies are informed by the ecologies, visible and invisible. So we're looking into the layers of the kind of like geological layers, deep time layers, looking into some species including Tortotubus fungus, which is 440 million years old, and also in the nuclear fallout, which is also invisible and otherwise not registerable unless we have specific instrumentarium to register that. We're looking also into the extraction site, as this is one of the biggest sites for the limestone extraction that contributes to the cement production in Sweden, which is also the biggest company in Sweden that is there. We're also looking into the burial of the chemical weapons in the Baltic Sea. Again, certain residue is being registered on the shores of the island. So we're looking basically in all kind of like invisible layers that sediment in the island, including local knowledges for the meeting with botanists and understanding of the extinction of the plants, and also in the media production, as the site has a memory of the first TV series on the Pippi Longstocking, this incredible girl that has a magic powers to lift a horse, even with two of her friends sitting on it. And also Greta Thunberg, another magic girl, who is becoming the spokesperson for the generation of the young people, as speaking of their concerns about their future, right? So it is existential concern about their future. But we also kind of like looking into the invisible kind of like things like shadow biosphere, which is hypothesis in biology, that there are life forms that are existing to us, but maybe of the limitation of the scientific instrumentarium, we do not register them, and also into the mythologies that actually there is a tradition, especially in the Nordic countries, about the better these mythological life forms that through the histories in the Nordic countries would be kind of like having a role of the early warning system, right? So they would always show up and appear and remind for the humans of their wrongdoings in the environment, right? So for us, this aspect was absolutely crucial in this project, as seeing certain mythology that maybe for the grown-ups, given all our rational mind and education, we try and kind of like erase all these mythologies, but for children it's pretty kind of like present, right? So they might see them as interlocutors with the site. And this work was started kind of like in the spring of 2020. So we're working remotely with the teachers of the school in music and art, English and biology. They're visiting the site and having the exchange over the Zoom. So they started to script these so-called eco monsters, the interlocutors between them, between their community and the real environment that surrounds them, as the school is actually there locally, and also providing certain scripts and also voices, to these eco monsters. So then we started to script kind of like the whole cosmology of these eco monsters, being them nocturnal species, living underground or above the ground, and then embarking in the translation process, imagining them kind of like as being kind of like each of them conceived individually between particular participants and responding to these ecological disasters, but also to certain concrete species, like in this case nuclear flocularia refers to the actual mushroom that is growing there in the vicinity and is on the verge of extinction, and also radionuclide fallout. So then we started to think about certain choreographies, and these choreographies are informed about these anthropogenic effects that are registered on the island, including different elements like carbon, methane, radionuclides, phosphorus, and sulfur, and mustard gas. And then imagining that these choreographies could be taking place in this large field of the future water pond system, of the future swamp. We're working with overlay, as I mentioned, and for us this was also very important that it would be this democratic technology. There are many perhaps different choices, right, to work, but we found overlay extremely powerful for what it could do in serving this purpose. And I want to share with you a few very, very brief clip of kind of like interaction. So here you see our first images of this first interaction in the actual field before the planning. So in a way, this this new mythology that is created by the participants is seeding the idea that how important it would be in the planning to introduce not only physics but also the spiritual world, also the metaphysics, and find a new language in the planning for that. To register kind of like ecologists in the place and to treat that place with respect, right, before the actual construction and the building takes place. So the place is perhaps fecund and is already inhabited, by the beings. It is just our inability to see and hear them, right? So therefore this technology could be so good. Yeah, so this is just very brief. Just to give you a sense how this choreography unfolding. Of course, it is landscape scale, and one would experience it by working, by activating it kinesthetically, as it is not only the visual or the oral, but it is also interplay of other senses. So we could also argue for certain synesthetic experience. And and at the end, I also want to say that it is not only me and Mameda and Nicola, but also it is collaboration with the pupils of Athena School, of their teachers, and also other collaborators, including also our former students here at ACT. Thank you all, and don't drain the swamp.
So one of the terms that I came across in doing research this past week was urban annotations, AR as urban annotations. And I really liked that term, and I started thinking about AR as a type of marginalia for our world, and not just with text, but also, its unique ability to include sound and video and all different type of media and stitch them together. And then the other thing that a number of you have already mentioned is its unique ability to allow for collaboration and co-creation with other authors, but also people in the community. So my first question is really to ask you each to speak a little bit about that process of co-creation and co-authorship, because although that always sounds like a really great thing to do or a goal to have for a project, but it's actually often quite challenging to build trust in communities and to build the relationships that allow for true co-creation or collaboration. Maybe Lori or Magna want to start?
Yeah, hi. So, I mean, I can speak to the founders' pillars, and co-creation or collaboration was essential. I think Simon and I were at MIT when we started our fellowship at the Open Doc Lab, and we started going with the history of the founder and then found the 6 pillars, and so we had this idea, but we were also very conscious of the fact that are we the right people to tell the story? And I think that is increasingly becoming important because, you know, it is really about who tells the story. And Lisiba is someone who I had collaborated with previously, but we also found that, you know, he is an expert in African textiles. So our sort of relationship was, you know, why don't you, we've got the idea and this is what we want to do, but sort of like you give us prompts. And so he found the textiles from 6 different regions of Africa which were most affected by slavery, and contemporary textiles and sort of historical, and also kind of this narrative of, you know, museums putting African textiles to be looked at we thought was kind of problematic, so we wanted to activate these textiles. And so it was kind of, in Hindi we have this word, jugalbandi, is like back and forth, you know, when you play music. And so he chose the textiles, he gave us certain myths or folklores, and he said, now you respond to it. And so like with me and Simon and the editor and someone in the After Effects, that was this whole team as well. So we kind of sort of took a prompt from him, and I would work on it, and I passed on the prompt, and it almost became like this game, you know. So that was our experience of co-creation, and I think for me what comes out of this is like who's really telling the story. It wasn't engaging with a community, not yet, to put it out there because it's in the context of the university, but I'm sure if the Founders Pillars travels, which it easily can, there are lots of colonial pillars around the world, then we think of, you know, collaborating in different ways.
For me and for my AR experience, it's more about how could I invite the community who's experiencing it to participate and co-create, and what would that look like? So is that something that would be involved? I mean, you know, there was co-creation with the dancers and the choreographer, and you know, that has more sort of technical side to it, and there are things, I guess, you know, to talk about with that. But I think the idea of, you know, inviting the community of participants who are experiencing it to become co-creators, and then what would that look like? So would it be by taking photographs and posting them? Where would they post them? What is that about these days? And all of those kinds of questions about what kind of community we're talking about. Are we talking about being co-creators in social media? What does that mean for us? What is this idea of a selfie? How would we share it? Why would we share it? So there were questions about that in my project that I was trying to pull out from it, or the idea of why someone would want to keep their photos or their experiences private. I think that sculpture, to me, is about like interior and exterior, and thinking, for me, when watching people and my own inclination to go into the middle of it, and then people who don't want to go into the middle of it, and some of those kinds of things. But in terms of co-creation, again, I worked collaboratively with dancers, but not so much about a community. My idea of the community was the idea of the people who would experience it.
So for us, you know, at the beginning we were very much inspired by Stavro Beer and Gordon Pask's idea of plugging the natural environment into the kind of like human system of organization, right? And that's how we started to think about this work. But gradually, we started to be very much focusing on this idea of composability, thinking with the environment, right? So sort of like building the idea on the phenomenon-based learning, right? So taking the class kind of like to this, not to the existing swamp, but to this future swamp, right? And really kind of like thinking together with the swamp, right? So sort of like, so how the swampian thinking could kind of like help us to develop new insight about new sociability, also kind of like how it could create new vocabulary for the future of the city, right? New sustainable city. And so in addition to working with Nicolas and his team at Hoverlay, working with also our student who in fact was taking the studio seminar in art and public space in the spring of 22, Terry Kang, who graduated from the computer science and the math here at MIT. With each of these, and then the pupils, and at Atheneum Middle School in Gotland, also with activists of the Eco Village there, with the Society of the Botany on the island. Each of the collaborators brought a specific insight, but also, not only insight. It also brought. It was a learning curve, kind of like that informed and modeled the project, sometimes going to the dead ends, sometimes kind of like, sometimes maybe suggesting kind of like new beginnings. Right? But I think along the human collaborators, for us, the modern human collaborators, and thinking together with the swamp was in the essence of collaboration.
So we are a youth empowerment organization, right? So our real focus is about giving an opportunity to our young people to tell these stories. So as I discussed in the This Should Not Be project, right? That came out of a conversation with young people. They wanted to figure out how could they speak out about the systemic racism that they were seeing on the streets. And we provided them with this opportunity. So the collaboration with us is really with like property owners, right? So we have to get permission to put our work in specific locations. There's lots of red tape and logistics that goes into that. So there's a lot of collaboration with, like I said, property owners, collaboration with the technologists. We were actually doing some things at that time that were fairly new. So I don't know if you noticed, but when that scene first started, there was, you actually walk through a portal. That scene doesn't start until you walk through this portal, right? That was some new technology that we were exploring. So our collaborations are really with, the technologists, our collaborations are with the property owners, the city, and then we are just really giving our young people this platform to put their messages out there.
So maybe just to echo, the part about the story. I mean, what I find fascinating is that for Havelay, because we started, like I was saying, we've been on this journey for a while, is that there is a really compelling story for local communities, as a medium. Because I think it kind of, local communities, I think, we're trying to tell the stories or engage the public or revitalize, an area or activate a downtown, or they lack digital platforms to do that. Social media is just too much, especially now. It's not where you're going to engage people about the downtown park or this renovation or project that is dear to your heart. So I feel like there is a little bit like when FM radio. I'm old enough to age myself, but to remember when the first FM radio started. It was this local thing, and I feel like it kind of fits a similar space in the digital world, and I think there's a lot of appetite as soon as people understand that they can create very compelling stories, very participative stories, where people can take photos with this content, where there's new ways to engage the public. There's a lot of positive responses that I've seen. So I feel like there isn't a whole lot of knowledge and understanding. I think it's growing, but I feel it's a perfect fit for local communities to engage as a medium.
Thank you for that.
So one of the things that I think about as a curator is the aesthetics of it all, right? And there has been a really kind of a sharp uptick in terms of it becoming a truly aesthetic experience. But then I also wonder about what are the criteria for a project to be successful, not just as an augmented reality project, but also as a work of art in a public space. And how do we measure that? And I think it's quite hard to measure that. And I'm producing with some artists right now several AR projects in Boston, and those are things that we're thinking about up front. But I would be really eager to hear from you if you thought about that, and what are some of the criteria that maybe you developed for yourself or that people around you brought to your work.
I think when I'm thinking about a augmented reality work and site specific, I always think of, is this a project that can be only done here and nowhere else? Because I think if you start from something very specific, when we talk about site specific, you bring people to a space to tell the story of that particular space, maybe of a specific time of what happened in that space. And I think I sort of think about site specific art in that way. And if it be that later on it can be transferred to something else, then that's great. But yeah, that's something I focus on.
In terms of criteria, I guess with anything to do with augmented or virtual art, it has to do with what is being added, and why would someone be willing to use a device at all, right? So there has to be some reason why someone is willing to mediate whatever the experience is. And so if we think about augmented reality in terms of to see what is invisible, right? To layer something, overlay, something that isn't there. Then we are bringing something we can comment on, we can react to something without destroying it, right? Without doing anything to whatever the object is that we're commenting on or interacting with or whatever. And so like that has sort of, I think it's kind of interesting in terms of what the possibilities are, in my mind, in terms of criteria, what makes something successful. For myself, I was interested in provoking or activating an emotion, right? And having people laugh, have joy, have a certain kind of an experience with my own. So that was my criteria for my augmented reality experience for moving memory. And to have a moment of reflection as well, right? So that there would be something that someone would consider, although how to bring that into it, I think became more challenging as started thinking about, well, if there's not a sign, how do you encourage somebody to consider something or to contemplate or to reflect on without putting words saying, reflect on this. And so I think that is sort of an interesting challenge for the medium in general.
Yeah, it is a difficult question to really say what makes art, public artwork successful. We could say, well, by definition, we could say if successfully you could achieve that voices of those that are erased and for some political reason or condition, are not present in the public through their intervention and through artistic project, can be heard or seen, or listened to, that is kind of like important condition contributing to the conceiving of the public intervention, right? So we can say that's already like part of the success. I think also, so in a way like this instantaneous and eventual performance of the kind of like that is also contradiction, right? Of what is permissible and what is not permissible. Also, important trait is actually a reflection on the form, on genealogy of the public art. I always start, with this example of Courbet, kind of like dismantling the Vendôme column, right? That's kind of like the column that is built for the celebration and glorification of the Napoleonic War that is being dismantled, right? So it is radical kind of like act of destruction, that is performed for this event. But of course, it cannot be repeated. It can only be done once, right? So, that what constitutes is kind of like maybe a successful protection of public space, right? At that moment. But could it be repeated, for kind of like continuous experience? I think humor. I think is also important condition. I think to be able to also laugh from your own intention. I think it is also an important condition of the successful work. I wanted to say actually one thing. I'm not sure what I should say, but I should say maybe as we're talking about the public space. So my mentor Krzysztof Wodiczko used to say, Gediminas, to make successful work, you also should consider a bit of the kitsch, so because people love kitsch, So, but I'd say we have to be careful, with that, So, not to put too much salt or pepper into the meal.
For us, success is the fact that the project exists. We're doing these projects with teenagers. And we know that teenagers have a lot of different things going on in their life. I keep going back to the TSNB project. We did that project in 6 months during the pandemic, right? Young people had a lot of different things on their mind, but we were able to do that. We shot the video. We were able to get into the library to shoot the video. All of that editing, that was all done remotely. So the fact that a project exists is a success in itself. And with all of our projects, as you notice, that there's always some type of anchor that's anchoring the digital overlay. You have to get a lot of different permissions for people to do that in public places. So, like I said, the fact that our project exists is a success, but then we have like hundreds and even thousands of people that are interacting with these projects, and they're learning about what these young people have to say. So we have a lot of different signs of success in our projects, and we're very happy with the success that we've achieved so far.
So I think some fabulous points. I think maybe I'll take a slightly different angle. Being more from a technology perspective, I think one of the challenges or what makes an experience successful is also the user experience outside, before, during, after they engage or immerse themselves with a piece. I feel there's the literacy around AR is extremely low still. Very few people know that they can hold the phone and walk, and that's. And you can see, it happens every day. You have the brain, this, spark, like, oh wow, that thing is still like, what? It's still, and all of a sudden it's easy once but it's so hard for people to, by themselves, discover that, kind of unprogram themselves and looking at the screen versus through the screen. So I think the more we think about that, and I think the more we develop this practice, I think there's a whole body of knowledge I think we're missing around how do you design these experiences so that the average user is able to know what to do. And I feel like that's a big topic on its own.
Right, and some of that is also generational, right? There's certain generations and people who are very comfortable where the threshold is lower versus people who might have a much higher threshold, and that brings up accessibility. And that's something that I talked quite a bit about with Sarah and her colleagues in the conversations with the lab. But I want to pause for a moment and look out to the audience and give you the opportunity to ask some questions. And if there are questions, you could raise your hand and I'll come to you with the mic. And if not, I've got like 12 more questions here, so, but I want to be generous and also acknowledge your time and ideas. So does anyone have a question right off the bat that they would like to ask? Okay.
This is really stupid, but I'm authorized by Einstein, who said, I want to ask the questions that only a child would ask, okay? The pillars didn't work for me at all. And so the techno-anxiety of the user, which you were just mentioning, Nicholas, is it my stupid phone? Is it MIT has no cell service? Did I forget to sign into MIT Secure? Is the thing loading? Should I just wait? All of the above. So part of the learning curve that I'd love you to give this devoted audience here is like, what are the challenges? Some teenagers aren't allowed to have a cell phone, like my granddaughter, right? So that's one challenge right there, right? So I'm curious as to maybe what you, the technologist, sees as the biggest thresholds to overcome when I, the user, couldn't even figure out whether this was my fault or its fault or whatever. So super stupid question, but maybe other people are thinking some of the same things.
Yeah, I think we're still at a stage with AR, which is where the web was pre-browsers and pre-standard, pre-HTML, pre-all those things that brought just a level of standardization that would make it easy for people to learn and get used to that, but also for the platform, the phones, to have a browser, versus just apps, or, so I think we haven't reached that point, which actually, being at MIT being really the beacon for, W3C and this whole initiative around standards, I hope at some point we can get together and kind of put our minds around what would be an open source format that then would incent the phone manufacturers to put this as a built-in functionality. So for instance, I could imagine that, not too distant future, your phone camera, which everybody knows how to use, is actually able to be a viewer for AR content built into the phone, and the technology I think is there, but there's a lack of standard, there's a lack of political will, because people monetize through this chain. They monetize the art, they monetize the views, they monetize the apps. It's very tightly controlled by Apple and Google. But I feel like this is, I think, what we would need to be able to get over this, standards, and then some kind of adoption, like free browsers that are on the phone and everybody knows how to use. Sorry, it was a long answer, but and if you're interested in that topic, come and see me. Maybe we can make something happen at MIT.
Does anyone else on the panel want to speak to that? Or can move on to another question? Okay, David.
Yeah, there are. I think we should really think of this technology that it is in such an early stage as the cinema was at the end of the 19th century. Cinema was not even considered as art form, right? It was more like a form of amusement, right? Kind of like, or some kind of like entertainment. It's kind of like some erotic kind of like interest or whatsoever, right? So in that sense, it is very experimental moment actually for the artist to tap in, because it is really up to us where we can take it further, right? So definitely still used in a lot of commercial applications, in the building technology, in kind of like in the planning, like in all kind of like applications that maybe are not so artistic, right, in a sense. So, and meanwhile, the technology is also developing almost like every month. You have certain updates, and I think in the hands of artists, we can really kind of like shape and push kind of like this technology towards more perhaps civic, environmental, sensorial, and kind of like and other means of welding, if you will.
Any other questions? Okay, right here.
My question has to do with looking, and I mean, I keep thinking that, you know, I just want to know how important is it. I keep thinking about this idea of defamiliarization, you know, Victor Shklovsky, and, you know, this idea of making things strange, you know, strange, not necessarily strange, but different so that people have a more heightened, you know, or intense or a different kind of, they see things that they would normally walk by and take for granted, but see them differently and newly. And so I was wondering if, you know, any of you want to speak to kind of the idea of defamiliarization and kind of, you know, augmented reality in public space artworks, kind of being able to kind of wield that.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, one of the ways I think about any art is that, you know, it can make you see something that's familiar in a new way, or see something that you've never seen before, right? You know, like, and it goes from there, right? But in terms of augmented reality, you literally can, or not literally, whatever, overlay the thing that you've never seen before on the thing that you've already seen, and then add to it. And, you know, not only in terms of looking, but also in terms of what we hear. I mean, the idea and the uses of audio in augmented reality is just so powerful. And so to be thinking about and so when we're thinking about that, I think that's absolutely at the core. And depending on what the goal is how strange we want something to appear, or an arc of strangeness. And I think that's a lot of it in terms of some of the storytelling possibilities that you know, we've been hearing about, and also that a lot of the layers of place experiences, activations work with, that seems to me to have a lot to do with that, of like how one scaffolds or positions the strangeness of it.
We're in the middle.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah, no, this is a brilliant question, and you know, it's almost psychic, because I was just thinking about that exactly point before this event, and I wanted to bring example of Janet Cardiff Münster work from '97. That was in the Münster Sculpture Project. You know, Janet Cardiff comes from kind of practice on the radio, and she introduces this audio walk that, and for me this is the best example of augmented reality. It kind of like, it has a conceptual principle of augmented reality. It augments reality just with the sound. And you hear that just kind of like I remember experiencing this with the Walkman, Sony Walkman, just with the headphones, going through the town, with the sounds being pre-recorded of the actual location, but overlaid with the actual location. You know, so sometimes so you experience this kind of like matching and not matching kind of moment. You know, including the smells. You know, like when you hear a voice saying, "Oh, there is this rose behind you," you know, that is blossoming, you know, and you really feel the smell, right, of the rose. So it really kind of like activates all your sensorial experience, right? And you start kind of like grappling with the real, because real is not kind of like what surrounds you, and maybe not what is projected, but precisely is like within this tension and reverberance between these realities, right? So this is like what is actually constituting this paradox of public space.
Yeah, I mean, I find it quite interesting because, you know, there's stories that exist, and sometimes they're sort of repressed stories, but the sort of physical signifiers don't exist. And then how do you tell stories of people when the physical thing is not there anymore? So I think this idea of layering and presenting something in a physical space, I think I find that fascinating. You know, it plays more into the idea of ontology and hauntings, that you find something which has been addressed that surfaces. But the other thing I also find very interesting is by doing something in a public space like this, normally when it's artwork, the space is taken to a place like a gallery or a museum, and we go and we see the representation of that thing in a gallery or museum. While with this, which is public and site-specific, the audience has to go to that very site instead of the site being taken into a museum. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. It's like the site demands you to come to it instead of being represented in some other way.
Also, one dimension of this I think is very interesting is the cognitive side of AR that I think also is not necessarily something that we've fully explored yet, but I think there is an element of retention and the impact that these installations can have compared to watching something on YouTube or where you're more distant from the content. And even though it's the same pixels, it's the same videos, it's just, the videos on the column, you could watch them on your phone, and it's a completely different experience because they're wrapped around, or the way they present it, the fact that you're in this space. And I feel like something that I think we haven't fully kind of embraced or understood yet as far as the power of the medium when you utilize it like that.
Yeah, we can wrap it up here and we can continue out in the lobby area. So please join me in thanking our panel this evening.